She didn't drown, she didn't disappear into the fog. She simply walked back into the sea, leaving her children on the shore, her husband clutching the empty skin he'd stolen years before. This is not a ghost story, it is something older, stranger, and far more heartbreaking. Welcome back to Golden Cattle Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. If you enjoy stories of hauntings, folk heroes, and forgotten pasts, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Picture the northern coastline of Scotland. We're talking about the islands of Orkney and Shetland, a place where the North Sea and the Atlantic collide, where the wind never really stops, and where the water is so cold it takes your breath away the moment it touches your skin. These were not gentle shores. The people who built their lives here, fishermen, farmers, the wives and mothers who waited on land, lived in close, constant relationship with the sea. It fed them, it killed them, it took their sons and husbands, and never gave them back. And so, as people do when they live beside something vast and terrifying, they gave the sea a story. To understand the legend of the Selkie, we need to understand the world that made it. By the 8th and 9th century, Norse settlers had been arriving on these islands for generations, bringing with them their own myths of shape-shifting sea creatures. They encountered a Celtic population that already had a deep oral tradition about the ocean, about the things that lived in it, and sometimes walked among them. Out of that meeting, Norse and Celtic settler and native, sea and land, the Selkie was born. The core story, told in dozens of versions across Scotland, Ireland, and Iceland, goes something like this. A fisherman is walking along the shore at night. Perhaps he is rowed out to a remote, rocky outcrop far from the mainland. In the moonlight, he sees them. Seals shedding their skins, stepping out of them like cloaks, and dancing on the rocks in human form. Beautiful, wild, and entirely free. He hides in the shadows, and then, whether out of loneliness, desire, or something darker, he steals one of the skins. The Selkie to whom it belongs cannot return to the sea without it. She is bound to land. She becomes his wife, bears his children, keeps his home. By most accounts, she is a devoted and loving mother, but she is never whole. She stands at the water's edge and stares out to sea with a grief that never leaves her eyes. And then, one day, years later, sometimes decades, one of her children finds something strange hidden in the thatch of the roof or buried beneath a stone. They bring it to their mother. She holds it, and without a word, she walks into the waves and does not come back. In some versions, she leaves a message. In all of them, she leaves her children. One of the most haunting variations of the legend comes from the child ballad known as the Great Selkie of Skerry. In this telling, a woman has a mysterious child by an unknown father. One night, a gray Selkie appears, a seal man, and claims the child as his own. He tells her, "I am no man of land or law. I am the great Selkie of Skerry." He takes the child back to the sea, leaving her with a dark prophecy that she will one day marry a gunner, a hunter, who will harpoon both the Selkie and the child he carries on his back. It is not a story of stolen love, but of destiny and doom, one where the tragic end is foretold from the very beginning. The Selkie myth didn't just live in stories, it wove itself into everyday customs and superstitions of coastal communities for centuries. If you wanted to summon a male Selkie, legend said you had to shed 7 tears into sea at high tide. Male Selkies were said to be extraordinarily handsome, and they had a particular interest in women whose husbands had gone to sea and not returned. Children born of a human and a Selkie were said to have webbed fingers or toes, sometimes requiring a midwife to carefully clip them. And here is perhaps the most telling belief of all. In many communities along the Scottish and Irish coasts, it was considered terrible luck to kill a seal. Because seals, people believed, were not simply seals. They were transformed humans. They were the souls of the drowned. To harm one was to invite a curse, the loss of livestock, failed harvests, or in the Faroe Islands version, a curse of drowning upon every man in the village. There is also the music, the Gaelic term Dan Naran, a beautiful, haunting melody heard at sea, rising from the waves without explanation. Sailors feared it. Some said that it was the Selkies calling to their lost families. Others said it was a warning. Either way, no one who heard it rested easily. So where did this story actually come from, and what does history say about it? The earliest written record of the Selkie legend dates back to 1641, recorded in Iceland by a scholar named John Gudmundsson the Learned. In his account, the real seal folk are described as sea-dwelling elves called Marmenlar, and the story centers on the man who discovers elves dancing inside a coastal cave. It's not quite the tale we know, but the bones of it are there. The sea, the hidden gathering, the human who stumbles upon something he was never meant to see. Historians generally agree that the legend emerged from the intersection of Norse mythology and Celtic oral tradition, both of which already contain figures who move between worlds, who belong neither entirely to land or sea. Some folklorists have also pointed to a more grounded interpretation. The remote Scottish island communities of Orkney and Shetland had contact historically with Inuit people who occasionally appeared on their shores in kayaks, wearing sealskin clothing. To islanders who'd never seen anything like this, such an encounter, a dark-eyed stranger arriving from the sea, dressed in the skin of a seal, could have seeded exactly the kind of story that became the Selkie myth. The two definitive folklore collections on the subject, Tales of the Sea People by Duncan Williamson and The People of the Sea by David Thompson, document how deeply this tradition ran in living memory, with coastal families well into the 20th century speaking of Selkie ancestry as though they were matter of fact. The Selkie never really left. On the island of Calsoy in the Faroe Islands, the village of Miklodalor is home to a striking 9-foot bronze and stainless steel statue called Kopakonen, the Seal Wife. She stands at the harbor facing the sea, commemorating a local version of the legend where farmers stole the Selkie's skin and kept her captive for years. When she finally escaped, the story says, she cursed the men of the island with drowning. The statue was unveiled in 1999, and she is one of the most visited landmarks in the Faroes. In Scotland, the old Ulrich Church and Cemetery in Caithness is said to contain the Selkie's grave, a burial site of a woman found as a baby wrapped in a sealskin who grew up to be shunned for her strange gifts and what locals called her second sight. At V&A Dundee, visitors can follow a free, family-friendly Selkie trail through the building. The Scottish Maritime Museum in Irvine has hosted Sea Monsters, an exhibition featuring Selkie folklore from the Northern Isles. And every October, the Orkney Storytelling Festival keeps these tales alive by firelight. In music, the legend goes across centuries. The traditional Orkney ballad, The Great Selkie of Skerry, has been recorded dozens of times. And in more recent decades, artists like Heather Dale and Frank Black have written their own Selkie songs, drawn to the same ache that always lived in the story. On screen, Song of the Sea in 2014, the Irish animated film by Tom Moore, is widely considered one of the most beautiful interpretations of Selkie mythology ever made. And The Secret Roan Inish, 1994, tells the story of a family who discover their youngest child may have been raised by seals. A story that treats the legend not as fantasy, but as something just possible enough to believe. Why does this story endure? Part of it, I think, is that the Selkie legend sits at the exact intersection of two very human fears. The fear of losing someone to the sea, and the fear that the people we love the most are not entirely ours to keep. The fisherman's wife who stares at the horizon, the mother who sometimes seems to be listening to something no one else can hear, the person in your life who is present and devoted, but whose eyes carry grief you can never quite reach. The Selkie is not a monster, she is not a villain, she is someone who was taken from where she belonged, and who, when given the chance, returned. Maybe that's why coastal communities for centuries refused to harm seals. Not out of superstition exactly, but out of something closer to recognition. The sea takes people, and sometimes, just sometimes, the sea keeps them. So, was she a goddess, a spirit, a woman misunderstood by her community, or simply a story told by people trying to make sense of loss? Perhaps the real answer lies somewhere between the tide and the shore, where land ends and something older begins. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you heard of a version of this legend from your family or community? I'd love to know. If you enjoyed this journey into folklore and forgotten history, please give the video a like and subscribe. And if you want to go deeper, I've linked some reading on Selkie folklore in the description below. Until next time, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.